Welcome back to our special focus on Nigeria's Independence Day. We call it Empowering Tomorrow, a new vision for Nigeria at 63. So, yes, indeed, when you speak about Nigeria's Independence Day, Empowering Tomorrow, of course, you look towards young people, lots of them amongst the studio audience, whom we hope to cross to sooner rather than later. But for now, we do have Mr. Babatunde Fashola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, the former Governor of Lagos, has been former Minister, several ministries. Now, he joins us today on Empowering Tomorrow, a new vision for Nigeria at 63. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on the program today. Perhaps I should start by saying Happy Independence Day to you, Mr. Fashola.
Happy Independence Anniversary to all Nigerians and to those of you in the Channels TV studio, and well done for your coverage of this anniversary.
Thank you. So let's start this way, because I mean, generally we just try to speak to people out there. What's their impression of Nigeria at 63? Of course, we do hear lots of broken promises. This independence comes with mixed feelings. They don't seem to be where we ought to be. But in your days growing up, the early days of the country, I mean, we always had different parents tell us I think it was a lot better, of course, because the currency was stronger, the economy was good, we had manufacturing. I'm sure perhaps you might have earned a couple of scholarships, but today is strange to a lot of young people when you talk about scholarships, so they don't know what that means. So to some of them, a lot of them, as a matter of fact, the green passport doesn't hold any promise. And that's why many of them just want to see greener pastures somewhere else. So start by telling us your impression about our independence, particularly our 63rd anniversary.
Well, I think that all of us owe a duty, whilst we expect more from our country, and perhaps let me even say from our government, to not deprecate our country. Our country must be separated from government, and it is our right, as it is our privilege under a democratic dispensation, to ask for more. And perhaps, as you have heard in the President's independence speech, he says that he is seeing and is listening, and so are members of his team, and I believe members of state government who also are putting in their sheets at different levels. Perhaps we expect them as performers to do more. That is legitimate. And just this afternoon, I had cause to make some remarks at the Island Club, and I was talking about the fact that those who ask why we commemorate this anniversary, it is a point of many things for me, reflection, and also perhaps an inflection point. Those who understand the history of this country, how it has evolved, must understand that it is a work in progress. There was a time when we were not free. So freedom itself is something worthy of celebration, while we ask for development and a better quality of life. So those are my own thoughts. We must keep hope alive. We must continue to work at our developmental issues. We must listen to one another, and we must all understand that if we put our hands to the pump and work to build this nation, there is no force that can stop us.
Okay, so if you don't mind telling us, I mean, you've been there in terms of governance, the policies, you have a fair idea of why things work the way they do. You'll have better knowledge and impression way better than those who are not in government, because now several people, we always year on year look forward to things improving better than yesterday. Well, yes, the president may have given his speech trying to rally the troops and see that he will be listening to do certain things, but you still have a lot of people who are feeling the pinch because current economic reality seems to becloud any sense of hope that several people may have. Could you tell us, why are things the way they are in this country, particularly when the president said a couple of days ago that we are, quoting him now, we are poor in leadership?
Well, let me say to you, Chamberlain, in the very privileged position that you have as a broadcaster, you have an important voice. You have a role perhaps as equal to that of any elected officer to use your voice to project hope. And therefore, we must be careful never to diminish hope. That is what drives the human race. That is what drives aspiration. And I accept that there are challenges. I accept that I have been there. I have done my shift. I hope that it has been good enough. And another generation, another team will move it on from where I left it. And this is the story of the human race and the global human civilization. And it is not easy in any country today, not in any country of the world. Of course, things are relatively better in some places than in some places. But in those places where you think it is better too, they think that things have moved backwards. Cost of living is a global phenomenon. And I've been reflecting a little, and I see that one of the things that our government has done recently is to play on the global stage in a way that perhaps signifies the importance of international politics, because we are beginning to see the impact of what happens in far-flung places on our shores within a very short time in this age of globalization. The cost of diesel, for example, scarcity of food, grains, has been impacted by a war in which we have no skin in the game somewhere in Europe. But it is not only us that it has impacted. It has impacted the whole world. And these have consequential effect on our international and local business. So international politics is a very, very important issue, and we must not toy with it because it has local consequences for trade, for cost of living, for price of goods and commodities, and the quality of life on the domestic front.
Well, some people will say that we have not been deliberate about separating country from governance, as the case might be, and sometimes we tend to muddle things up, you know. And some people will say that, you know, that doesn't come all of a sudden. If people are going to learn to separate country from governance or development, that comes as an intentional state policy, so to speak, you know, where people know about their country, know about the origins of their country. Patriotism is something that is cultivated among citizenry, so that regardless of whatever the economic circumstances are, citizens appreciate the potential that their country continues to hold. And some people will say that over the years, we seem to have let our country down with regards to that. Some of the symbols which we hold, you know, are not very well respected. Just today, when we started the program, we had to, you know, emphasize the fact that the flag, which we see flying in most places, or which we have seen many people hold as celebratory flags, it's not exactly the correct representation of our country. How well would you say that we've paid attention to some of the little things which we used to pay attention to in the past, and upheld, you know, the emblems, the symbols that actually hold us together as a people?
Maokwe, I wish I could give you a standing ovation, but I can't get up because I'm recording. But you hit the nail on the head. And in fact, I dare say that you've probably stolen my thunder, because what you are talking about is part of the speech that I am giving at an event later in November, talking about our duties to our country. Just this afternoon, I was asked to hoist a flag of Nigeria. By the time the flag unfolded, I saw that there was a coat of arms in the middle, and I whispered to my host that this is not the flag of Nigeria. Nigeria's flag does not have a coat of arms in the middle. It is green, white, and green. And the National Orientation Agency, which has offices in all the states of the country, produces and sells this flag. So those are some of the small things that matter that we must begin to deal with. I also think that, as you said, we must be intentional. When I was in primary school, these were the symbolisms of those Independence Day parade, Children's Day parade, and this was how we were taught. How we were taught to stand up or maintain our position whenever we heard Nigeria's national anthem being rendered. And you see today, and you shudder in your skin, what happens today, what people have been taught when the national anthem is rendered. Of course, I believe that it is a symbol of our sovereignty, and when you render it at every little event, even when the president is appearing at a social event, they sing the anthem. I have had cause to ask people not to sing the anthem for me, either as governor or as minister, because I'm not the sovereign. It's a projection of our mind. So these are, for me, the important things to talk about. And that's why I say this anniversary provides an opportunity for reflection and indeed inflection, to start to change those small but significant things and how we speak about our country, which is another strong point you have made. I spoke to one of your colleagues once, and I said to him, do you understand how much damage you are doing to this country? And he said, oh, Mr. Fashola, you know, our duty is to sell the news, and you know bad news sells. I said, I respect that in journalism, but can't you separate the government from the country? In all those places, we've seen presidents who their people have disliked in other parts of the world, but not one of them in the criticism of their presidents or their prime minister have ever said that their country is the worst place to live in. Why are we so quick to own the most derogatory epithets and descriptions of our country? So what has happened to us? And I am making the case here, and as I will going forward, perhaps we must begin to become a nation of creed. We must find a creed around which all of us can rally. Something people have rallied around the creed of their land. They have rallied around the creed of their capacity, whether as a farming nation or a manufacturing nation or a sporting nation. We must rally around a creed other than the ethnicity of our individual nationalities. And this is where, again, I disagree with those who say Nigeria is not a nation. They are entitled to their views. My views are that Nigeria is a country of many nations. And those nationalities are built on tribe, ethnicity, language, and religion. And they represent our diversity. But can we forge a country without losing those diversities around a creed, a purpose, such as law and order, honesty, for example, and those kind of things? Safety, a place where you can be all what you want to be. Let us begin to valorize some of the small but important things that have happened in this country. This is a country where many people have risen from grass to grace, where there have been stories of nothingness to everything. As I asked somebody once, do you know any son of a king or any son of somebody who has become a governor or president? These are, most of the people who have held those offices in this country are people who have started from very humble beginnings. Those are dreams around which to valorize our nation, about a nation of enormous possibilities for everybody who wants to compete, instead of valorizing the dreams of other nations. There are so many of those such stories happening here, and perhaps this is the time to turn it around.
And one would like to, play off those kinds of stories. I know that, bad news sells, yes, it is true. But we also know that people long and they yearn for good news. If there's anything we've seen on social media, or social media is telling us, the fact that, when something good happens, people also want to celebrate those things. And we've seen, occasions where Nigerians celebrate other Nigerians who are, flying very proudly the flag of this country outside of its shores. We've seen, Nigerians who are even trained outside of this country, flying our flag very proudly and being celebrated back home. But many a time we also see people very disappointed in the little things that happen. I mean, only recently, a young lady died needlessly as a result of, entering a vehicle, what is popularly called one chance. Good Samaritans taking her to a hospital, and she wasn't attended to, and as a result of that, she died. Now you have amongst young people a saying, which I do not subscribe to, I must say, let Nigeria not happen to you. These are the kinds of things which we cannot run away from. They exist. So on a day like this as well, isn't it also important that we bring out not just the hopes, but also the disappointments that our people have, suffered over the years and, now begin to associate with their country? How do we begin to address these disappointments that people have felt over the years as a result of some of the losses that they have experienced?
My honest answer, the image and the pride of a nation is a public relations work of all of its people, not just its government. So if I came to your home now, today, and every home has its bad place that is not good publicity, you won't show me that part. You will show me your nice and tidy sitting room, and that's the impression I walk away with. That does not mean that there are no issues in those homes. That does not mean that all the bills have been paid, and that is how we must treat our nation. So, and it is not enough to begin to valorize things that Nigerians do outside the country, and that is important ambassadorial work that those people do, and I take nothing away from it. But we must begin to emphasize a little more of the small things and use it to build hope. As I said at the beginning, hope is the most important currency that sustains the human civilization, that sustains harmony, the expectation that I can make it. And so my advice to you, to your producers and all of you, in the same way that you probably ask people to retract certain statements that they make on your platform, those kind of statements that Nigeria should not happen to me or whatever it is, should not have any place again in our public broadcast. This is the time that all of us must put our hands on the pump. And those who want to denigrate the country, you must first ask them, do they have another country? I don't have another one. So it's not just work of government, and it is the right to criticize government. I repeat that. And criticism has helped serious governments. Criticisms helped me when I was in government. And I believe that this government will listen to criticism and use them as fire to build a better and a warmer place for all of us to be. But that said, in the name of criticism, there must be no negative word about this country, even if it has its negatives. I remember an IBA conference we attended, and the theme around which we discussed that was that, can we all agree never to put forward Nigeria's negatives? And I have held to that commitment I made solemnly as much as I can.
A lot, they say, rise and fall with leadership. Some days ago, we listened to the Minister of Information, and his narratives was, lots of people were quite surprised, and they thought, this is the kind of narrative that they usually want to hear political leaders talk about. It sounded very conciliatory. He wanted everybody to pull together, that we were one country. In every way possible, we should manifest that moving forward in every sphere of our lives, as a matter of fact. Those are the words that he said. And amongst ourselves on the program on that day, and then it came up saying, look, the minister may have that narrative because he says that is what the president wants, the mindset that the president wants him or wants for the country. But we also do know that when it then comes to probably, say, elections, the narratives are different. Now, do you think that political leaders, do they heed this kind of narratives? Because, yes, there's a lot that individuals can do to move this country forward, and they're all leaders wherever they are. But would you agree that political leaders have a very huge, very significant role to play, and they should be seen taking this advice headlong, probably first and foremost leading the pack so that everybody else can follow?
So you rolled a couple of issues in there. First of all, and I'm happy that somewhere in between posing the question, you acknowledge that everybody is a leader. So there's no leader bigger than any other person. All of us are leaders in our spheres. If you do your own leadership responsibility in your own part well, and others do their part, we will meet at a place of harmony and happiness. But I agree with you. Those who are supposed to lead us because they represent us by votes have some elevated level of responsibility to bear. And it is very, very easy to contain them, even if I say so myself. First, there is the power of change at the next election, and then there is censure that can happen in what they say, either in print or electronic media platforms, or even in town hall gatherings. And somebody should be able to say, no, sir, you can't do that, sir, or you can't do that, ma'am. And in a polite way, bring the person back. Because in any event, politicians, and I can say this, are most vulnerable when they're looking for votes. And that is the time when we should really exercise our franchise by calling them out to come and explain to us what they want to do. All too often, perhaps, one of the things that I have seen is that after we have elected them, we now start asking what they are going to do. I think by that time, the horse has bolted before we are trying to lock this table. The heart of the social contract is to begin to trade votes for what we want. Are you going to support this? Either you are seeking legislative office. For example, I want certain rights as a woman or as a man or as a child. Are you going to vote for them? And if you don't vote for them, then if you don't subscribe to them, they don't form part of your policy proposals, then I won't vote for you. And if you deceive me and you get my vote by deception, I will wait for you at the next election. This is how it works in the best possible environment. And this is where we must elevate our politics to.
So, Mr. Fashola, listening to you, I mean, even several narratives, the Gap Fest, several times that you've spoken about certain things about governance or leadership or how you perceive things should go in a particular way. But we also have seen, I think you made reference to that, and we haven't seen a lot of political leaders told the same line. I stand corrected on that possibly. But
well, I cannot speak for everybody. I can speak for myself. As I've said in some of my public statements and writings, public service was not something I ever set out to be part of. But immediately I found myself in it. I tried very hard to look at models that have worked in different jurisdictions, and it was a continuing improvement and self-education. And that was why you saw that I was always in town hall meetings explaining to the people what I was doing. I was ready to have a debate. I was ready to explain laws. I was ready to explain positions, because I understood that there's a difference between the title and the job. And the job is public service. And so I had properly defined my job while taking the title. And perhaps there are many other examples out there that we haven't paid attention to, and not only at national level as presidents, but also at state level as governors, at senators, House of Rep members, heads of parastatals. There are many commendable examples that I have had cause to encounter. And those are some of the stories that I think that we should propagate about what we have achieved. No matter how small they are, let us valorize them and then use them as building blocks to inspire even better performance. And nothing but the best must be good enough for us. And the definition of the best must continue to improve. And so I'm not suggesting that we celebrate any modesty or mediocrity, but every little achievement must be a starting block for the next one.
You know, Mr. Fashola, there are lots of young people in our studio in Lagos who are listening to you right now. Several other people have in time past when you speak about governance and how you expect things to go. Perhaps I'm going to cross over to Lagos in a moment so that we can get a question from some of those members of the audience. We hope we can patch it on to you so you can respond to them. So could you then tell us, what would you say, because we face this on a regular basis, professionals, those who are out there who want to come into politics and contribute their own lot, but they always tell us that, look, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them because they feel that the system has already been rigged against them. You need a godfather to go through to even get a footing in there, because if you don't, you can't go anywhere. Yes, they may have the laws amended to allow younger people come into politics, but they don't have the financial muscle. It takes that to prosecute elections in this country. What would you say to those who feel despondent about contributing their own quota, perhaps being in there, not just being on the menu, but being on the table and discussing?
So there's so many things to unpack there. In a conversation I had with some young people, I asked them to go and read a book called Game Change. I don't quite remember the title, but it was about Barack Obama's road to the presidency. And when they finished, they came back to tell me, so he had a godfather. I said he had godfathers. They said they just thought he was giving speeches and that was the road to the presidency. But it was Harry Reid, I remember, and Ted Kennedy, who actually asked him, go and run, we will support you. So it wasn't just about giving speeches. So you need, because the way our own constitution says, you have to belong to a political party to seek office. So if you haven't been involved in the process of running that party, forming it, contributing to it, then how do you take the platform? And then when those who hold the platform say no, this is who we prefer, you accuse them of being godfathers. In any event, there is nothing really negative about the nomenclature of godfather. If you go to his origins, it's actually about mentorship in the way that it started. And I know that among the Catholic faith, for example, this is something that is really promoted, that children have godfathers to help them through life. But that said, again, all of us can be politicians, and all of us can be political office holders. But for those who also seek to hold public office, all too often, perhaps, some of them start at a level where there is, and I'm looking for the right word here, where perhaps the place where I think government is most impactful is at the local government level. And I've argued that perhaps because we call it local, people don't like the word local about it. Maybe we should change the name. But that is where healthcare, primary healthcare is resolved. That's where refuse and sanitation, that's where foundational education is dealt with. That is where small businesses get their approvals and licenses. That is where the heart and soul of a community in terms of the developmental aspiration runs. So, but who wants to be a local government officer? Who wants to work as a community health officer? Who wants to work as a local government treasurer? Those are not, everybody perhaps, and I say this with some exaggeration, and pardon me, but people want the highest office, the big sounding ones, and perhaps to understand that there's also a process of evolution. And in many careers, in many professions, you don't just qualify, for example, in my profession as a lawyer, from the day you leave law school, and then you go to the Supreme Court and start trying cases. Your inexperience will show. It is possible, it has happened, but you will learn a thing or two and know that you jumped a few steps perhaps too quickly. And just in the way that you don't become a medical doctor and then a surgeon, and one day they just say, come and do a full open brain surgery. You would have watched, you would have participated, you would have seen mistakes made, you would have learned not to repeat those mistakes before you get the center stage. But those are perhaps exemplary of the kind of experience that it takes and the mentorship through public service development before you get to bigger offices.
Well, I know that, as Chimolin did say, we have a host of young people who I'm sure would like to engage with you this beautiful Independence Day celebration program we're having, Empowering Tomorrow, a new vision for Nigeria. So I'm going to go to our studios in Lagos. Ini, I'm sure you have people waiting to put their questions through.
Okay.
It looks like we cannot hear Ini at the moment. Apparently people are speaking, but that's going to take a while for it to come on. And it'll be very interesting to hear what some of the questions or comments that they'll have.
Oh, yeah.
Can
you hear me now?
What he has said so far. I know
now
that
I can hear
through us
okay,
of our conversation. We're supposed to be drilling on his experience as minister. And maybe if we do have time, we'll still be able to talk about that.
Malpa, can you hear me now?
I understand Ini can now hear us. Ini,
Yes.
if you can hear me,
Yes.
What are some of the questions, that are coming up as a result of some of the comments that the former minister and former governor have made?
All right. Thank you so much, Malpa. And I was saying, Honorable Minister, so good to have you on the show. I guess you're an exciting figure because we have a lot of questions here, but we'll just take just a couple of them because of our time. I think Zainab here has a question about empowering youth, but I'll just let you hear a voice, so it's not coming from me.
Hi, good afternoon. Okay, so my question is empowering youth and leadership. What should be done to youth?
I'm losing the audio.
Zainab, maybe should stand up.
Okay. Okay, so my question is empowering youth in leadership role. What should be done to the youth to achieve this aim?
All right.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard that, sir. Did you get that?
I did.
Okay, she was talking about empowering youth. Exactly, great. Then we also have Onwuka.
Into leadership roles.
True, all right. We also have Onwuka Famous.
Right, thank you. Oh, thank you, sir. We've actually heard a lot that you've communicated to us. We quickly go straight to my question. In the course of your explanation, you really taught us that we shouldn't be negative in talking about the government. Rather, we can criticize the government if they are not doing well. So I want to actually ask, because most of our young people, they tend to misunderstand criticism and uttering negative words. In the process of criticizing, they end up uttering negative words. So please, can you really expatiate and throw more light in form of advice to them, how they can actually throw a critiques to the government, attract their attention to do the right thing, rather than uttering negative word. Then two, I am asking this question for the benefit of our young ones here, to learn more ahead of the future. And again, what should be the disposition of our youth? Sometimes after criticism, government doesn't respond to most of the critics. So what should be the disposition of our youth if after much criticism, their government, not giving a listening ear? What should be their disposition, sir? Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, that's a very, very important point. If I can respond to that.
All right, sir. Go ahead.
I think for those who are, I'm getting some echo now, but I'll continue. I think for those who have experienced only our democratic experience, you are very lucky. There was a time when you were not allowed to even criticize government in Nigeria during the military. It had consequences. You could just disappear in some extreme cases. And even journalists have been imprisoned, even for writing the truth in this country. So you are the inheritors of a great legacy of freedom that comes with that democracy. So, and I didn't say that you couldn't criticize government. What I'm saying is that you could not denigrate your country in the process of criticizing government. So if an example might suffice, I can say that I don't like my government. My government is bad. But I should not say that my country is bad if an example was necessary. And now, in terms of how government works, yes, when you criticize and government has taken feedback, government works with the bureaucracy of civil service. So it is not as quick. The responses are not necessarily as quick as you would expect. And that is why it is important for government to then continue to show first that we have heard you and to periodically explain, for example, what is going on. So if an example was necessary, let us look at the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. And we were trying to construct that road for the period of my service as Minister of Works. Out of 127 kilometers, we completed 114. But the very, very difficult part, the Lagos end, had what you call black cotton soil, which we had to remove. There were delays, but at periodic times, we kept coming to explain what was going on. The dates for completion was shifting, and we tried to explain. Of course, there is no perfect communication, and I take responsibility for that. But 2 days ago, I got a text from somebody who said, oh, thankfully, I can now drive to Ibadan in 1 hour. I am in Ife now. It took me 1 hour. So government response is not always as quick because of the processes they follow, as distinct from the way private sector works. And perhaps it provides an opportunity to also reflect on whether to imbibe some of the private sector speed and sanctioning and remuneration, if you like, in the public service to make it better. So, and I've encouraged a lot of young people, if the public sector is not working for you as you expect it to, then something is wrong. It means that you must go in there and go and show that it can be better. How many people want to work in the public sector, except, of course, as politicians and title holders? That's another conversation. To the first question about what can be done to help young people in leadership, I think the very best thing you can ever have is first a solid and sound education. And for those who have a political dream, let me say that politics for me, and I think for many people, is not a profession, it's a vocation, it's a calling to serve. So you can't be there forever. And therefore, you must have another address, you must have a job that you are doing, you must do that job well. If you're a professional, you must operate at the highest professional levels. Ethics and values matter in the way that people play politics, and those are the foundations for proper leadership. And in that sense, you do not get caught up in the trappings, and the leadership is a lonely place, and it also confers power that history has shown can be abused, and therefore it is the restraint in the exercise of leadership, your big authority, rather than for the development and service of your people, that is really the heart of the matter. Once you start exercising the benefits for the powers for yourself, then you really lost the job.
That's the much we can take right here. Thank you so much for your answers. And I'm sure the youth here are happy to have been able to express themselves.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, so I was just appreciating your answers to the youth. I'm sure, unfortunately, we can't take more questions because of the time, but I'm sure the youth here, I mean, are you happy that you were able to ask those questions? If you are, can I hear a round of applause, please? Thank you. That's the way they can say thank you for those answers to the questions.
Okay, maybe when we are having our next Gab Fest, if they can leave their names in the studio, I'll ask my team to invite them to the next Gap Fest so we can converse a little more.
There you are.
You can hear that.
There you are, Mr. Fashola. You just made their independence. I'm sure they always remember the celebration of the 63rd independence in Nigeria. But thank you for your time once again. And I'm sure their names are already with us. I'm sure a lot of them will want to be there. But I'll hand over now to Abuja. Mokpe and Chamberlain, back to you.
Oh, yes, thank you very much indeed, Iniso. Yes, I'm sure they'll be looking forward to having participating in GapFest. So let's talk about getting institutions to work. I mean, yes, let me bring in this one now because you're also going to respond to public-private partnerships. I know you had some, that aspect came up while you were in governor in Lagos, about some arrangements that went on. And I think I also remember that at some point, there was this narrative that was really circulating at the time, we didn't get to confirm it, where they were saying some of the contracts or agreements, MOUs that Nigeria usually have with some foreign nationals. In fact, there was this narrative at the time that it was usually in Mandarin and it was signed, and at some point they thought the Nigerian end didn't go through, they didn't go through properly of some documents that we just signed it. So perhaps you just tell us about what is it with public-private partnership in this country? Is it working? Are we where we ought to be? What do we need to do to at least leverage on that a lot more? Does that model even work for us?
Okay, so why do countries pursue PPPs or states? It is in order to mobilize more capital for infrastructure. Infrastructure is defining for our quality of life, whether it is education, whether it is agri, whether it is healthcare, whether it's transportation, whether it is whatever you want to do, infrastructure is defining for it. So the more infrastructure a community, a state, a country acquires, the better the quality of life. And you will see that perhaps some of our citizens who have opted to emigrate are probably driven and impacted by the quality of life, and that is the infrastructure. So what governments have done over the years is to mobilize private capital, and that is where the idea of 3 Ps came in, public-private partnership. But there was an erroneous understanding, perhaps in our space, and this is something I'm also writing a book about, that, PPPs was like a silver bullet. Government should just hand everything to the private sector and it will work. Perhaps if you interrogate our economy today, most of our economies were privatized in the aftermath of the structural adjustment programs, and we still think that there's a lot of improvement. So Channels TV is now private. This was a space where only government used to play many years ago. Print media now private, banking private. Government has really let go of many things, aviation and all of that. But government is still the leader across the world. I did a study across the 7 continents, and I see that in many cases, governments are spending up to 60 to 70% of government funding to deliver infrastructure. The space that private sector occupies ranges from as low as 15% or 5% in some countries, sometimes to up to about 40% in some countries, and Nigeria is no exception. So at the national level in the last 8 years, we've mobilized, I think, through, and there are many types of private capital PPPs that you can have. You can have direct concessioning, which we try to do to concession 1,900 plus kilometers of 12 roads under the Highway Development Management Initiative. We ended up by signing the concession agreements to the successful bidders, and it is going to the next stage, which is for them to now go to financial close, go and raise capital. If that succeeds, we would have mobilized almost 2 trillion naira or thereabouts into the road infrastructure sector for Nigeria. That will relieve government, but it comes with consequences. Tolls will have to be charged on those roads. Are we ready to pay? Then there is the other model, the tax credit scheme, which the last administration used a lot. We have about 85 roads spanning over 7,000 kilometers through private investors like the Dangote Group, the Boa Cement, the Nigerian NLNG, MTN, GZ Industries, and NNPC. And at the time I left, we had just mobilized a commitment of about 2.9 trillion for NNPC, for roads which we hadn't deployed. So those commitments are there, and they inure to the benefit of this new administration to go and close those transactions because all the contracts have been awarded. So some of the roads that are in bad condition now are part of that 2.9 trillion, including the Warri-Sapele Road and a couple of other roads that need attention. That is another model. I think I've spoken to the Sukuk. That was another model. So those of us who drive through the outer marina now, you drive through a very, very pleasant road. That was mobilized by Sukuk. Some parts of Nigeria also benefit from Sukuk, all the 6 geopolitical zones. And you will see the signages about what private capital has done. But the truth about it is that it takes time to conclude. Every government has only 4 years, and therefore most of the things may be started in one administration and completed over a second time or run into the lifespan of another administration. So it's not a silver bullet. Government must still lead the spending, including by borrowing, including by raising taxes. You have had conversations about how low our tax to GDP is in the sub-region. That is something we need to do something about. These are the heart and soul of the social contract. And I hear those who say, oh, if they pay the tax, then how are they sure to be accountable for? That is the power of the electorate in a democracy. But it's a chicken and egg, and we must find a place of consensus. But we cannot leave everything to private capital. Also, let us understand our economy has been described as a frontier market, and those have their challenges. But more importantly, the local economy itself. How do you mobilize capital in an economy that is largely driven by micro, small, and medium enterprises? And that is not a negative thing. It is actually a good thing. But that is the bulk of this economy. Over 40 million such businesses exist. So they don't have the big billions to deploy to infrastructure. And let us also look at our financial system. How much is the long-term capital that our banking and financial sector can lend to infrastructure funding? Because infrastructure funding is long-term assets, and there's a mismatch using short-term funds to deal with it. The last I knew, and I might be wrong, things may have improved, a gas plant project, infrastructure, I think they raised about 7 or 10 year money. That is movement and progress from when there was only 5-year money in this economy. Ultimately, I'm sure we will get to 15, 20, 25-year money, and we will begin to see more private sector capital mobilization to infrastructure. The Lagos State government, as you know, is trying to build the 4th mainland bridge. The big hobbling point has been how to mobilize that private capital into it. And the alternative would have been whether we Lagosians were ready to invest in a single dedicated fund, maybe a 4th mainland bridge debt issuance program. Would we have done that? And the jury is out about that.
I reckon. We have to thank you for coming on this morning, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, former Governor of Lagos State, former Minister of Works, former Minister of Power. Oh dear, well, at the time I wanted to ask you about the FDAs and what we saw with the civil service some weeks ago, but gosh, we just can't. But we'll find time some other time in the future. Thank you for coming on today, and happy Independence Day to you.
I wish you the same. Thank you for having me.